time we can start with other communications. Thank you very much. Emily, Piluca, I'll give you the floor. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this third module of our leadership course that has been organized by the two international organizations, the UISG and the USG, International Union of Superior Generals, and you'll see that we structure this module in a different way. Well, there are a couple of changes, not many, but you'll soon discover them as this module unfolds. As we are already used to it, we're going to remember a bit all together the topics that we covered during Module 2. You'll probably remember that during the first session of Module 2, we focused on context, and especially the global context, especially now during the pandemic. And we also realized how we are experiencing, well, we could call it like this, we experienced the death of an old paradigm. And we also experienced something that is emerging. And since it's emerging, we don't know how it is yet. And that's the main feature of something that is emerging. And with this regard, I just wanted to tell you that the word emergence shouldn't have been translated as an emergency, because when we are talking about emergence within this context, we're not referring to emergency in the sense of something urgent, but in the sense of something that is emerging. So that's something that is sprouting from something that is being born. And this picture reminds us of these possibilities that we have. That is to say, the chance we have to live leadership that can act as a bridge within this transition period, and that is supporting the emergence of this new paradigm. And after that, during the second session of Module 2, we wondered where that energy, motivation, and that spirit come from so that we can carry out everything. And we realized that these springs from within, from ourselves. And we also saw this, it is that there are two chances. We have the integration and the disintegration. So that's a bit a recap of Module 2. And the current module, number 3, has the following title: Weavers of Communion. During the first session, we'll be dealing with the topic of authority and power, and so that we can analyze what direct relation these two words have with the weaving of the communion. We'll be also analyzing misperceptions about how we exercise our authority and power, and that these can lead to conflicts and disagreements, whereas a correct way of exercising authority and power can provide a valuable contribution to the good functioning of human organizations and their cohesion, and they can help us to have organizations that can serve the purposes they've been devised for. This will be the topic of the second session, and this drawing reminds us of the topic of emergence. And starting from emergence, we'll also see, and also starting from some attitude, we can create or we can bring about some communities that can be in the service of a purpose. So both topics are focused on this title, that is to say, weavers of communion. So with no further ado, we'll be moving to the topic of authority and power. And then we'll be also listening to what this sociologist Zygmunt Bauman says, and well, he passed away a few years ago. And he stated that the origin of many problems we are currently experiencing lies in the divorce between politics and power. So, the title of this module is Authority and Power in the true and noble meaning of the words. We can identify politics with authority. So, what Zygmunt Bauman says about politics and power can also be applied to these other pairs, that is to say, power and authority. And it's at the origin of many problems we're experiencing lies in the divorce between politics and power. Sigmund Bauman is a sociologist that created a very interesting concept, the concept of liquid modernity, and he also applied it to a liquid family or to liquid love, liquid work, because we are currently living in a world where everything is getting out of our hands. There's nothing solid. And I do recommend you to read something like this book, Liquid Modernity. And he also said that in current world, governments are losing control of their own countries because power is becoming globalized, it's become transnational. That is to say, governments keep on being national, but their power, the powers that are controlling and leading the world, that is to say, financial powers, the power of mafia and terrorism, of drugs, of the financial world, all these kinds of powers are transnational powers. So there's a kind of disruption between authority and power, and this is the origin of a series of serious problems in the functioning of countries and societies. And this is what he says, that is to say, countries are permeated by the global power of finance, of banks, of the media, of crime, of the mafia, of terrorism. And he also adds what follows. He says that the great task for our time is to reconnect politics and power. So I would say that the huge task for our leadership is reconnecting in a good way authority and power. And how can we reconnect them in the practice of leadership? How can we reconnect them in the lives of our congregations and institutions? And on the other hand, wherever we realize that there's this disruption, how do we proceed? Authority and power, both are necessary. And right from the beginning, we can already clearly state that power, based on this reflection, has a positive connotation, necessary positive connotation, as authority and power are both necessary. At the same time, we need to be able to distinguish them, not only from a conceptual point of view, but also in the exercise of our leadership. That is to say, they're both necessary, but they're not identical, they're different. And where does their difference lie in? So, and how does it translate into our exercise of leadership? A fundamental difference between authority and power is that power has to do with personal characteristics of individuals and groups. We'll be analyzing this in detail later on, but this is the main difference. That is to say, power has to do with people, with individuals and groups of people. So power is a characteristic, is a feature that some groups and individuals have. And it can be very faceted. It can have a different nuances, whereas authority has to do with roles in a given system, in a specific system. And since we already became familiar with this scheme, it can help us to position from a graphical point of view uh, authority and power. By using this graphic, this chart, we can see that power can be positioned here within the framework of a person, whereas authority can be found within the framework of the system. And as you see, these circles are interconnected because it's not something static, but it's something dynamical. And so even though I may say that power belongs to uh, uh, people, is a personal characteristic, we also know that a person lives within a context and that a person is part of the system. So it goes without saying that everything is somehow dynamic and interconnected. It's intertwined. So we cannot come up with fixed definitions. And power belongs to people. The same applies to authority, which lies within the area of organization. But organization is also part of the context. An organization is made up of people too, as you can see. And that something that we shouldn't forget is whenever we're talking about authority, we're not always talking about a formal authority, like, for example, our superior general or a provincial. No, every person, based on his or her role and in their system, in the system they're acting in, they have their own share of authority. So authority is not exercised only by a provincial or by a superior general, by a canonic figure. Of course, they have a canonic kind of authority, but within a congregation, within a human system, each person has their share of authority. And this is defined based on their role where this person is acting. Do you remember the creative nun we were talking about during the first module? So, Sister created, well, she was part of different human systems. You probably recollect this. And her part of authority will not be exactly the same in each of those human systems she's acting or she's moving around. So if she's a provincial within her congregation, in that system, her role is the role of a provincial. So, and this is the authority that is given to her as a provincial. And if she's, on the other hand, if she's a member with no canonic authority, then her authority will be the authority given to her as a member of her congregation. And we have a table here. We'll briefly analyze it. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to focus on other more essential aspects, but I think it's very interesting to have a look at these table too. So we have a basis for comparison in the first column, that is to say the main features of power. So the meaning, significado is the meaning, that is to say the ability or potential of an individual to influence others and to influence decisions and behaviors. And this is the personal characteristic. And where is its source? Well, in our knowledge and expertise, in our social status, in the knowledge we acquired. And it's a personal trait, as we said. And then from a hierarchy point of view, power doesn't follow any hierarchy and it resides with a person and it's not legitimate. It's just there. Some people have power and some others do not have it. Whereas in the case of authority, then we are talking about a legal and formal right to give orders and commands and to take decisions. And within the framework where that person exercises his or her authority. It is a formal right given to high officials. So, and it's granted to me. Authority is granted to me. Its source derives from the position or the office I'm currently fulfilling as a member of the congregation or as superior general or a provincial. And in terms of a hierarchy, authority follows the hierarchy and it's, well, we are designated and it's a legitimated kind authority. Well, you can find all these characteristics in all kinds of documents about authority and power. And there are different kinds of powers. And I think this is a very important aspect that we should consider. Sometimes we say, oh, that person is really powerful, has plenty of power. But what kind of power are we talking about? Because sometimes they have some powers, but do not have other kinds of powers. We have personal power, for example, that is to say, well, that's my own power that I cannot uh, leave it as my heritage to somebody else. For example, if I'm an intelligent and smart person, I'm a creative person, I'm very sociable, in that case, I'm talking about my own personal power, then instrumental power. It is to say, things that I have at my own disposal and that I can use or that I cannot use. For example, I could be smart, but I do not have a PC. I don't have a computer, so I have the power of intelligence and of being smart, but I don't have the instrumental power of having and owning a computer. And money, for example, is an instrumental power too. So when we start to think about the different dynamics, and then we start talking about the topic of communion too, because power generates different dynamics within human groups and organization. Who has an instrumental power and who hasn't? This can lead to very interesting dynamics, and sometimes they're quite difficult to analyze. And then we also have a projected kind of power. That's the power that other people project onto me. So other people see this power in me. Well, sometimes you say that they always choose the same people. Why is that? Well, because sometimes a person uh, has somehow like a projection of some kind of power. So it's like other people project so their perceptions onto that person. And how can we wield this kind of power? Well, what do I need to exercise my authority if I have a projected power? Because if nobody is projecting some ability onto me, then I cannot exercise an authority. And then also seduction or charism, great, well, famous dictators were also characterized by projected power. So these were people who said, I'm going to fix this situation, just trust me. Then we also have the official power. Official power is related to the position I'm holding. And for example, you can say that you are the chancellor of a university or the director of the seminary. So this confers a power upon us. And then we also have social power. Uh, Social powers is exercised by groups or people who can influence decisions that are going to be made within those groups. And some groups may have more groups than other subgroups, and they can influence the decisions that are going to be made there. They can also have cultural power. Some groups may have stronger influence to define what's correct and not correct, or how you should speak or sit or dance or eat, and the kind of clothes you should be wearing. So in this case, we're talking about cultural, and we all know about neo-culturalization, cultural neo-colonization. And then we also have economic power. So we have groups that have the power to use economics. They have different silos. And then we also have political power, of course. Now we're talking about um, political decision makers that with their decisions can affect majority people or a nation. And legal power, in this case we're talking about groups that have a say, or they have the power to decide what you can do and what you can't. And everything in a human system, these types of power can be used appropriately or inappropriately. We already said that power is intrinsically good and necessary, but we can use it in an appropriate or in an inappropriate way. And then you also have authority. And as you can see, we have three different manners of interpreting authorities, but they are somehow complementary. So, one source of authority is from the top. When I'm talking from the top, when I say from the top, then I'm not referring to God, but I'm referring to the fact that within a congregation, organization, then there's a source of authority that is conferred upon us from the top. So, from a higher level, for example, within a general chapter, appointed as a superior general. And this is possible because the general chapter, so a higher authority, granted me this opportunity, this power, this authority. So, and all these canonical authoritative figures within our congregations have an authority that has been granted to them from above, from the top. Then, at the same time, we also need to have another kind of source of authority, that is to say, from the bottom. Because in order to be able to exercise our authority, we need trust. We need to be relied upon by our colleagues, by our brothers and our sisters, and so from the bottom, from the base. And this is also another source of authority. So before we were talking about projected power. For example, if I am appointed as a superior general, but then I'm not being supported by clear signs that And I do realize that people do not trust me. They don't trust what I can do and what my abilities are. uh, so that they don't trust me, they don't trust me in the performance of my tasks, then it will not work. And then another source of authority is from within, because I can receive authority from the top, from the bottom, but also, but you could also be saying, well, I'm not cut for this. And so sometimes you may wonder, why am I here? Why did they put me in this position? I'm not able to do that. So you need to be aware. It's not a matter of being reckless or proud. No, it's more a matter of being uh, confident in a humble way, in a simple way, that you feel from within that you're going to be able, God willing, and thanks to the help of my brothers and sisters, that you're going to be able to perform that task. And you see that these circles are somehow intertwined in a dynamic way, because especially when we're talking about authority and when we're talking about officially granted authority, as happens within our congregations, if you do not have these three different sources that are feeding and nourishing your authority that you're called upon to exercise, then it's going to be difficult. Power can be and is often used without a corresponding authority. But on the other hand, we cannot exercise authority without the corresponding power. So let's have a look at these two concepts in more detail. So in the exercise of leadership, power and authority are inversely proportional. So what does it mean? It means that if you exercise your leadership from your authority, then your recourse to power will be minimal. It will be as least as possible. So if you exercise your leadership based on that experience of the three sources of authority, then that experience will motivate you and will make you feel confident to exercise your authority. And in that case, your use of power will be minimal. Whereas, on the other hand, the less you lead from your authority, the more you will resort to your power. So it's like a game in a way. And it's these two concepts are working in an inversely proportional way. So the clearer the sense of authority is, the authority that has been granted to you, then the less you will resort to your power. So you will not have to say, well, we have to do this because I say so. And on the other hand, the weaker is that sense of the authority you've been given to, that you've been granted in order to perform a service. Well, in that case, you will have to resort more to your power. So here we have these two very nice people, and we can wonder who has power and who has authority. So in my leadership practice, how do I concretely relate to the power I have and the authority I am given? Or in another way, who is supporting whom? So is it the power in the service of authority, or is it the authority in the service of power? We've already said this, but this is of paramount importance. We cannot exercise authority without the corresponding power in order to exercise that authority. So we need to have competencies, instrumental resources, and the reasonable trust of our colleagues. And now let's see the whole thing from a more concrete point of view, because this is where we can reflect our own experiences based on our institutions and based on our experiences of society. So when I exercise the authority that I've been given without the power and it requests, then we will be just like a chair that is missing a leg. So, so it's very difficult that this kind of chair will be standing. So if you are given an authority, then as a person, you will also need to have the corresponding power in order to be able to exercise that authority. And in 2 slides, we see that this is not happening all the time. And I would say that sometimes also in our consecrated life, sometimes this is not happening. But we'll be seeing this later on. And at the same time, there's something really beautiful. The fact that even if I am like a chair with a missing leg, then when authority comes from within, as if it were a call or a vocation, then this gives me the power I need. So even if I do not have the power, the corresponding power going hand in hand with that authority, that power will spring from within. And some historic figures are an expression of this, like Martin Luther King was a man without power in a way because he was the member of a marginalized group, was a victim of racism, but his authority came from within. It wasn't a granted authority, but it was an authority that came from the conviction that he was part of the world because he wanted to make a difference in what it was part of something. So, and this became the power he needed so that he could exercise authority because he felt called upon to exercise that authority. So there are plenty of nuances. We cannot say that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and that everything is always very strict. There's a wide range of nuances, of features within these framework, and power and authority do not depend entirely on external factors, but they can spring from within. Emily was talking about a source the other day, you remember? So sometimes my power and authority will spring from within, from my internal source, from my inner source. Sometimes, well, people have authority and others have the power. So, well, this similar to that chair with 3 legs, and you probably have different experiences, but in some cases, in congregation, you will come to a situation where there's this kind of disconnection, disconnection between people exercising granted kind of authority and the power, or instrumental, or political, or economic power, is in the hands of other groups and cannot work. It's not possible that it's going to work. In a human group, and even less within a congregation, if there's this separation between those exercising authority and those having power, then this will lead to a very serious situation that will call for many efforts in order to get out of a problematic situation like this. So it can cause plenty of problems. So when we see these three situations about authority and power, we can always wonder, what can we find about this within our congregation and in our personal experience of leadership? I think that in some cases we'll be confronted with these situations, also in our profound experience of a source of authority and power that is springing from within. For example, the chair with these three legs and a separation between authority and power, these situations can be found in our groups too. And another situation that can occur is when I underestimate the power that I have from my own authority. When I'm given or I'm granted an official kind of authority, then I'm able to exercise power. And if I underestimate this, then this can be very dangerous, not only for me, but also for other people. Also, sexual harassment within education or in sport or in the church by people exercising power. This is an abuse of power. In this case, we're talking about an abuse of power that originates from their authority, because the role of authority implicitly produces trust between the leader and the people for whom we are exercising our leadership. And if you make use of these situation of authority for your own personal gratification, then in this case we're talking about an abuse of power. So we need to make a clear distinction, because from the very moment that I am granted an official authority, then I'm also exercising power. And I need to know that there's the risk that I may abuse that power. That's the reason why sometimes there are problems like sexual harassment or in the working environment, or violence in education, because in this case I am misusing the authority I'm granted, or I'm making abuse of the power I have, or family violence, for example. This is an example of violence within our working environment to people working, to home workers. And this is an example of King David that abused his power when he saw the beauty of Bethsabe. He took advantage of his authority as a king to or organize everything so that Urias was going to die in the war, and in order to be able to be with Bethsabe. So he's misusing the power coming from his authority for his personal gratification. This is a terrible and an extreme situation, of course, but we have to acknowledge that things like these may occur also in our own life. And when I use the authority given to me to increase the power I have, this may be the result, corruption. So I'm using the authority given to me in order to increase the power I have. It could be my economic power, for example. In this case, we're talking about corruption. Because I have power and people acknowledge me as a person having authority, and so it's very easy for me to have more advantages and to increase my economic power or other kinds of power. So in the exercise of leadership, it is more effective to lead from the authority you've been given than from the power you have. So if we go back to the picture of that father who's holding uh, his child, in spite of the limits of a picture, I would say that in that case, the power needs to be in the service of exercise, of a correct exercise of authority. And authority doesn't need to be in the service of power, or does I do not have to use it to increase my power. Because as you probably remember, within authority, we can serve the purpose of the systems we are in and from which we operate. So different kinds of power can help me to exercise that authority that are in the service of a purpose, and the purpose is the purpose of the system I am in. And not the contrary. So I'm not using my authority to exercise my power or to increase my power. In the context of the current and the past world, we realize that there are plenty of exercises and of situations that refer to people who are using their authority. For example, in the world of politics, politicians have a granted kind of authority, which has been granted to them by the people or by elections and so on. And well, there are plenty of politicians that are taking advantage of their authority to increase their power, to gain benefits and advantages, to increase their purchasing power, or to increase their power in general. And we shouldn't forget that the system and the context are intertwined concepts. So what's happening in the context? Well, we should always be wondering, so what's the situation within my institution or within my group? So we always have to ask ourselves this question. We always need to be very attentive. And for our organizations to develop in the service of their purpose, it is necessary for each member to understand what their authority is and to learn how to exercise it. And we should also add, and what kind of power do I need it to exercise it? There is nothing intrinsically wrong with power. Power is bad or harmful if used as an instrument for one's own satisfaction or to manipulate others. So, healthy leaders use different kinds of power. So, they will be using their experience, their skills, their personal power, their competence, their spiritual power, in order to take on their role in the service of the purpose of the system in which they operate. Very well. So we came to the end of this presentation. And now we're going to spend the next 15 minutes, we're going to devote them with a sister and a brother. So we're going to spend a few minutes with a brother and a sister that we invited so that we can chat 15 minutes with them, because we wanted to extend the conversation to more people, but that was not possible. So I don't know where they are now, but I hope we can see them. There they are, Liliana and Enrico. Where are you guys? Liliana, I can see you, perfect. And Enrico, hi. Liliana, I don't know you personally, no, but I'm pleased to meet you. And you are in the CLAR. Yes, I am in the CLAR. What's your congregation of the company of Mary? Oh, that's great. And nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. And I know Enrico very well because well, we've been carrying out different activities together. Yeah, I'm brother of La Salle from Italy. Right, so in the next 12 to 15 minutes that we wanted just to start a conversation, so the three of us, about this topic. So first of all, I just wanted to listen to your opinion. Please go ahead. Yes, well, I don't know if Liliana wants to start or yes, as you wish. Enrico, I'll be starting. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you, Piluca,
de todas estas
for
secciones
inviting
que
me to this session.
me gustaba mucho la manera como empezabas
And
haciendo
I really liked your introduction.
la semana pasada, esa certeza
You always recap
sociedad
topics
compleja.
and the fact that we're living in a living system, living
Vivimos
society,
un mundo permeado por
a
la crisis,
complete society that has been affected by a crisis.
como líquida,
And you also made a very interesting reference to a liquid society, or we could have called it a fragmented or porous society.
poder
But
también, pues lo prestamos en medio de una
it's
sociedad que es
very interesting, this concept of a complex society, society that is rich with possibilities, but also with crises and threats and challenges.
pensar que
And I think
vamos
it's
ahí sintiendo
really good
que la autoridad
fact
es dada
that
como don,
we can position ourselves
es algo
there.
que se le da
And I
fácilmente
really like the fact that you said that authority is as a gift, you said.
de cara
And
a
it's a
responder
gift
a
that
una misión
imposes
que se nos
upon
confiere
us,
y
well,
que nos
a mission
exige
we've been
pues
entrusted,
situarnos también
and
desde
that
la conciencia en
can
contexto.
position ourselves within a context,
En ese sentido,
being
pensar
aware of the fact that
los
we
procesos que
are
representan
working
en
with
ese
other
sistema de
people,
poder, pues cómo todos pueden enriquecer ese sistema vivo
and I think
al
that
que
it
pertenecemos
can be
todos.
very enriching to this
La
living
importancia
system
también de
we
poder
inhabit,
contar,
and the
narrar,
importance to
desde
be
ese ejercicio de autoridad
able
o desde
to
ese
narrate
poder que a cada miembro
stories from
específico tiene
within the
de
power
maneras
that
que
each
tienen
member
esas
has,
características de las que hablaba. Entonces,
based also on the characteristics we were talking about.
me ayuda que
And
tú nos invites a situarnos en
I think
contexto.
it's very good because we're able to position ourselves within the context of the world we are inhabiting.
En el fondo no se
And also the fact that power and authority are not opposing things, but they are part of the same reality. And the most important thing is
intencionalidad
what our attitude is, what our purpose is. And I really like this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liliana. Enrico, please go ahead. I'm going to be talking Italian. Well, I was very interesting about his explanation about power and authority. And I think that the most important thing is where the source of our motivation to be a leader is. So it's like rebalancing, or it's like an exercise of finding the right balance all the time between power and authority, because there's always a choice between the new and the old, as we said last week. And because, well, on the other hand, well, you just do not have power and authority. No, they're not fixed. So you need to adapt to different situations. So it's a process, and situations also have effective power on how we can experience authority. And Piluca, you were also saying that economic power within our religious organizations has a power, and sometimes, well, it humiliates the authority, or it's impossible sometimes to follow the authority we have from within. Economic problems we have in all our congregations need to be controlled and to be followed up with a given kind of power, which needs to be the correct one. So we do not need abuses of power. And everything you said during these three meetings about the concept of authority, well, you said that authority can be applied to all different kinds of contexts, also the family context. Sometimes we talk about the absent father can be considered an authority. It's also within our organizations and congregations. It's a way to rediscover our authority from within, and we needed to learn once again how to manage power, because, well, I'm not a superior general, uh, fortunately, but sometimes I listen to my own superior generals, and sometimes I have the feeling that you do not need authority in order to implement some changes and improvements. Sometimes not even power if authority is not recognized. So the relation to the context and to the system is very important, but especially I think that the most important point was the source you were making reference to, and that also Emily presented last week. Yes. So I'll be speaking Spanish, right? No problem.
Diría, esos matices, ¿no?, que he presentado, porque autoridad y poder es como una especie de
Yes, authority and power, they are somehow a game with different variables and nuances according to the context. But I also introduced a wide range of possible situations. Of course, there are also other situations too. For example, sometimes in a group, power and authority do not match, or authority comes from within. Does any of these resonated with you as a challenge for consecrated life or for the life of our congregations? Was there something that you said, well, yes, this is applicable to my own situation?
A mí me resonó cuando
Yes.
hacía alusión a los abusos,
For example, when you were talking about
a la
abuses,
manera como se
it
ejercita
really resonated with me. For example, when you say you were talking about sexual abuses or uh,
y me resonaba porque
abuse
yo
of
pienso
power.
que
Well, yes,
en el
this really
liderazgo
resonated with me, because I think
a
that
vivir
sometimes the leadership we experience, well, in the leadership we experience, the most important part is uh, the way we intentionally use power.
gustaba mucho esa palabra
I really
propósito,
liked
propósito,
the word you
y
used,
el propósito
purpose. I think that, of course, we need a purpose too, not only an individual purpose, but also collective kind of purpose. So we need to have a common project. And in this sense, I thought that this service, a service that we've been entrusted with, is a service that
de conversión y de
demands
discernimiento.
to live in a state of conversion and of discernment. We needed to leave our hearts open.
Si entramos en las marañas del poder,
If we get stuck with power, sometimes we lose track of purpose. So there's a dichotomy, as you said, and this can be very harmful. It can be very bad. And so I really like the reference you made
asociado a la manera
the topic of the abuse of power.
del poder que se nos ha confiado y sentir
Sometimes
realmente
I,
invitación que
I
nos hace
think that
acreedores a poder vivirnos en estado de
this is also the
y de
invitation that God
la motivación
makes to us. So we need to live in conversion and conversation and discernment so that we serve our purpose and especially our common purpose just above
Muchas
our
gracias,
own
Liliana. Enrico, antes
personal
¿me
interests.
permites hacer
Enrico,
un pequeño comentario sobre lo
will
que
you please allow me to comment on what Liliana said? Because something occurred to my mind while I was listening to her. And I said, well, in consecrated life, especially information and so on, well, we always talk about obedience, of course, the vow of obedience
integrante
is an
de
integral part of our consecrated life.
yo
But
creo que hoy se necesitaría vincular
I
mucho más
think that
conceptualmente y luego también
today we need to
realmente
connect it from an existential and conceptual point of view, the vow of obedience to the topic of power and authority. Otherwise,
yo creo
it
que
will
hay
not be
una
enough because
tendencia
in the current world, I think that the vow of obedience needed to be somehow
con
revised, if we
esta
can say it
con este
like this,
enfoque
based on
un poco yo diría más humano quizá pero
a more human approach, I would say. But Enrico, please, sorry, I interrupted you. No, no problem. Well, I live in a city, Naples, in Italy, where mafia is really a problem. So the topic of corruption really struck me.
Anche la Chiesa in
And
Italia, soprattutto nel
the
sud Italia,
church, especially in Italy, but especially in the southern part of my country, still holds a power that has been recognized by people. So it's pretty easy for us as the church to fall back to these abuse of power, uh, depending on the fact that we are a powerful institution there. And corruption sometimes is creeping there. Well, because sometimes we say yes, but we do good. And sometimes, if we want to do good, we tend to accept some ways of power and not of authority. So sometimes we need to be vigilant, we need to be attentive in order not to implicitly fall back to those abuses. Because sometimes the power is entrusted upon us based on cultural or not cultural tradition, and corruption
è un lato sensibile a cui dobbiamo
is a
essere molto
very sensitive issue
perché
we
possiamo
need to pay
nascondere delle
attention to because
realtà e
sometimes
poi in
uh,
realtà
well, we
non
can
essere
resort to
consapevoli
it
delle
without
situazioni.
because we want to do good. But in
bueno
this case, then we're
desgraciadamente
not applying what the
terminaba
gospel says.
nuestro
Well, unfortunately, we ran out of time.
habría mucho más para compartir estoy segura
I'm
pero
sure that we could have
gracias
shared a lot more.
Liliana
I'm
muchas
sure of this,
gracias
but thank you, Liliana. Thank you, Enrico, for your time.
sí
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
y
Thank you,
buscaremos
Piluka.
otros momentos y modos para continuar
And I hope
esta
that we will have the chance to
conversación.
continue this kind of conversation. Thank you.
Muy bien.
Thank
Ahora voy
you.
a pasar
Very well. Now I'm going to
a
give
Emily.
the floor to Emily.
Emily.
Emily?
Vamos a tener un momentito de silencio, quizás ahora.
We're going to hold a minute of silence now to reflect.
Sí.
Yes.
Vamos
That's thank you, Emily, for reminding me.
Ahora vamos a sosegarnos y
Yes,
a poner todo esto en las manos del
Um,
Espíritu,
we're going to reflect and to put everything into the
tomando un momento
hands of the
de
Spirit while keeping a moment of silence.
Bueno, pues ahora, Emily, por favor.
I'm going to give the floor to Emily now. Thank you.
Muy bien, pues muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Piluka. Thank you for sharing this with you, for sharing your presentation with you, and for talking about power and authority. I think this is very interesting. And we're going to spend definitely more time to think about these two concepts, and we're going to be thinking about the role that power and authority play in our life. It's going to be very useful to us. And by the way, talking about the power and the authority we are granted to, there are two anecdotes that came to my mind, two stories that came to my mind about what you explained. And I remember, for example, that a superior general recently elected well, the fact, as a superior general recently elected, I said, well, I'm still the same person, so nothing changed. And I was discussing with a person, and he said to me, while I was coming to you, I listened to other people, and one told the other, very well, now, if you want to talk to Emily, you will have to go through a secretary. So as you see, well, as a matter of fact, with that position, so it's not just the position, but it's what that position represents, what that role represents. So it's a matter of actually becoming aware that it's not identified with me, myself as a person, as Emily, but it's everything that is connected to my own position. And then another situation, another view of that power. Well, I remember that I visited a school, a remote school somewhere in El Salvador where nothing ever happens. And it was really the school for the last of the last, very poor people. And I was received as if I were the Pope. So I felt not at ease. I just wanted to go unnoticed, so I didn't like that. But I told myself, well, nobody ever goes to visit school in this remote and distant place. And as soon as they feel that somebody they consider important is paying attention to them, that's very important to them, to empower them. So I thought, okay, I'm just a superior general. And well, you know, I remember that I was high-fiving the kids and the guys, and they were really pleased and proud because they thought that somebody important had gone and visited them. So that was the power and the service of the mission. I'm going to share my screen with you because now we're going to start talking about the second part of today's topic.
Entonces, eso. El módulo 3.
So, module 3. And after talking about authority and power and the different dynamics in groups, societies, and our congregations, we start talking about this topic. Well, Piluca made reference to it also at the beginning of our presentation when she was talking about the weavers of communion. What are we talking about when we talk about weavers of communion? We're going to deepen topics that you already saw during the first and the second modules, because otherwise we never deepen any topic. We just talk about topics in a brief way. Well, weaving is something very nice. This is something that we inherited from our ancestors. It's craftsmanship. Every person has to learn how to weave, and it's combination of colors, of textures, and sometimes when they are matched in a harmonic way, then the result can be very pretty. So this is the topic of today. So we're talking about weaving and weavers because we have to craft something, and which is something which is not automatic. And we will also be talking about communion. Some people in the forum, thank you, by the way, for participating in the forum. Well, some conversations were really interesting, and I really enjoyed reading them. Some people made reference to personal experiences, and it was really impressive what you wrote there. Thank you very much. And you also said that emergence was a topic worth deepening. And Piluca and I wanted to go in further detail and combine emergence with another aspect. The first one would be this. First of all, we should remember that transformation happens through emergence, not by any other process. So we're not talking about changes, but we're talking about transformation. And in living beings, this is what's happening. So transformation happens through emergence, not in an incremental way. Sometimes we say, well, within my congregation, we're going to change one by one, and then when there's enough of us, the system will change. But this is not the way that the living system is working, because life is made up of networks of relationships, and all of a sudden, something new emerges or comes up. And the result is different from the different parts that created it. We could think of a pizza, for example. Well, we're in Italy now. So, well, as you probably imagine, everybody loves pizza here. It's like the dough of a pizza. I take flour, I take water, I take a pinch of salt, pinch of oil, and then yeast. And I mix all these ingredients and I prepare a dough. Then I put everything in the, well, I let it rise, of course, and then I'll put it into the oven and the result will be a pizza. If the pizza is too salty, then I do not have any alternative. There's no going back. So I cannot undo the salt because the salt has already been mixed with the dough and something new emerged and there's no way I can change it. I will just have to throw my pizza away because it's too salty. And probably some people were very surprised when they read one of the texts of Margaret Willey. And especially, well, I was surprised myself too, the first time I read it. And during the first module, there was a text that said, what the world needs today is not more businessmen. The world doesn't need businessmen. It doesn't need more politicians. It needs leaders. And halfway through the text says, the system we're living in, well, we don't like it, but we know that we cannot change it. So when I read, well, if we cannot change the system, then what can we do? So in this sense that a system emerged, we don't like it, and there's no going back. We cannot go back and change the ingredients. So we just have to start from scratch again. So we need to prepare a new pizza. We need to create a system with a new paradigm, with a different paradigm. And on the other hand, we have the power of community. So whatever the problem is, community is the answer. And in this process of emergence, the most important part is collections. So networks are the only way of organization in this system, which are used by living beings. Let's think of an ant, for example. What's an ant? Or a bee, for example. It's something insignificant on its own. But when bees network or ants network, then we have a beehive, for example, in the case of bees. And this is something wonderful. So these are the two focuses we'll be using to talk about the topic of today. And let's see these in more detail. So how living beings go through this kind of process? Well, we've seen this with Piluca. So we have like a loop and another loop here. That's what we call the two loops. It's not a theory of change. It's more a map enabling us to position ourselves, to understand where we are. So this is the first loop. This is the curve that life generally follows, like a human curve. So you go up, or you rise, for example, a society, everything is going well or is thriving. So the society is flourishing and thriving, and then, well, the society falls. There's a decay, and this applies both to societies and civilizations and human beings. De Luca, talking about Margaret Willey, said that we have sometimes a decaying society or civilization. And we can also refer it also to large systems like a health or education system, a church, a religious congregation. We're not talking about congregations as such, but we're talking about paradigms that those organizations use to evolve. And so basically, that's the way the loop goes. Well, just think about what happened in the life, in religious life, following the Second Vatican Council. So there was a rise, and then we are descending. Some people would like to go back, so to the situation where things were going well, and some others said, no, we just have to accept it because this is what's happening and there's no going back. But there's a moment in life where people say, well, this process is not working, so we cannot move this direction. We have to come up with something new. And so that's when people start new things. On a social level, for example, we perfectly know that there are innovators. So when society is declining, they do not give up. So if there's corruption, discrimination, violence, and racism, then they say, well, no, I don't like this system. This is something I want to fight. And so people, in an individual and separate way, start to create new things. And if you're, well, not everybody can be an innovator or a pioneer. Well, you have to be able, you have to be tough enough to be able to do that, because of course it can lead to or to burnout. Sometimes it's like you are fighting everybody else. I think this is very interesting. Interestingly, these people all of a sudden meet other people, and there's like a first contact among them. So they thought that they were feeling alone, that they were the only ones. So they thought as if they were mad or crazy. But all of a sudden, they find a group of like-minded people who share everything that is working, or the idea about what's working and what is not working. And you may wonder if you and they are doing the same. So then small networks of like-minded people originate. Some people may say, for example, well, I don't like this education system, so I'm creating an alternative education system. So these yellow people, for example, start networking, or they start contacting each other, and they say, how can we mutually support us? So in a business world, we could be talking about a practice community. So people with the same interests start networking, they create a group, and they start sharing and dreaming. And then that's what's happening all of a sudden. So there's this loop we have here. So this is a paradigm that is dying out. Some people already started new things. So there's already a new paradigm, so this new way of doing things. And so they created some practice communities, they came into contact, and we gradually began to create a strong new normal. When we have a look at religious life before the Second Vatican Council and now, then we see that in the last 60 years, radical change took place. Before, it would have taken centuries, whereas over the last 60 years, we witness an incredible change, disruptive change. So this previous paradigm was becoming obsolete. There were some uncertain communities, communities that were experiencing the life in the communities a different way. And so naturally and gradually, we begin to create a strong new normal. And there comes a moment where you create a bridge from the old to the new. So those people who said, this is madness, this is not the religious life I know, the constitutions I followed were different, and then all of a sudden they realized that this system is working, and so they build a bridge from the old and the new, and so they see how probably they were right when they forecast this change. And the same applies to other systems, not only to the system of the church or the system of our congregations. We can see it in a clearer way here. The old paradigm that is dying out is going to finish. People start new things, a new loop begins, new paradigm, so there's a new normal. And this old paradigm is probably dying, and we need to create a new paradigm because of the fact that the older paradigm is dying. Yes, this could be an option too. So, and let's see these two loops from another perspective, a more complete one. And you also have a reference here, After Now. This is the book I used. We cannot see the future, where do we begin? So when we cannot see the future, where do we begin? That's the title of this book, After Now, by Bob Stilger. It's a biographical book providing us with different tools we can use. This is a very interesting one. It was published in 2017. There's only an English edition available. And if you're wondering where you are situated within these scheme, am I here in the old paradigm? Am I resisting it? Am I opposing it? Or am I in the bridge? Am I falling down? Am I among the pioneers here? You see, there are different ways to identify ourselves. So we could be stewards, that is to say, stewards are people who are still part of the older system, of the old paradigm, but they provide a service, that is to say, the old system continues and is going to continue for sure. So how can the system help me in terms of innovation, in terms of following this loop? So, and stewards are there. Bergoglio, the Pope, would have liked, for example, maybe to be just a Jesuit father and just pushing innovation toward, but then he became a bishop. So he had to serve the innovation from within the system as a bishop. And then he became the Bishop of Rome. So in that case, how can he, from within the system, lead to a shift of paradigm? So I'm here. Then I can be a hospice. I can hospice. So we're not talking about a hospice for as an orphanage, but we're talking about the place where terminally ill patients go to. So where you have treatment and where you can accompany in decadence. And you have to accompany people with love and tenderness, because also death is a natural process and you need to accompany people to a hospice in a way. So you have to accompany them, having a general overview of where we're going and whom we are accompanying, or whom we are supporting. And they may be innovators or pioneers. This is not easy because, as I said, sometimes you have to pay a price. Because if you want to be an innovator, well, you have to run a risk sometimes. So sometimes within this process, you have a series of innovators. We can identify them and we can say, yes, you exist. And there are other people who are exactly doing the same thing somewhere else. So you are naming them. Not only you name them, but then these people, they can connect among themselves. And then they can create some community of practices so that they learn from one another. And then, so first they become networks, then community of practice, and from there they become system of influence. And what does a system of influence do? It can illuminate, it can interpret, it can help other people. I'm going to set two examples so that you can better understand this process. The first one is solidarity with South Sudan. That's the first example. I don't know if it came up like this, but it was conceived as a service. For people who do not know it, it's an initiative of the two international unions of superior generals, both men and women here in Rome, that they set up a series of communities in South Sudan, communities made up of religious men and women from different congregations, and all communities are intercongregational and mixed, so made up of men and women. So this is something innovative in religious life. And we could put it here. So in this case, we're talking about innovators. We could place it here. So these communities were set up, then they started to connect, and they turned into communities of practice. And the missing step would be that of connecting to other networks somewhere else in the world, other networks having their uh, similar experiences, because this just stayed there in South Sudan. Probably in the future, we are going to take this step so that this initiative is going to turn into a system of influence for the whole of religious life, a real innovation. And another innovation, well, there was a seminar a few days ago between Thedos and Faith and Praxis, and we listened to the experience of the Holy Family of Nazareth, a small congregation, a religious woman was part of the education system, and she said, well, I don't like this system. This education system is not working. It's not producing the kind of people that we could have. And based on scientific knowledge, we could be working in a different way. The brain is working that way. So we have to adapt ourselves. So in a school in Barcelona, little by little, so some partnerships started with teachers, and the whole education system was upset, was turned upside down, and turned into an innovative kind of school, a point of reference. So it was just a single school back then, and gradually it became popular, and this school started to connect with other schools. At that time, all the schools of this congregation all over the world started to connect to each other, and they became a benchmark or a point of reference in terms of innovation, because they put the pupil to the very heart of their system. So it's not teaching, but students that are at the very heart. So we're talking about a community of practice with different feedbacks, and it turned into a system of influence because this school connected with other schools outside of its congregation, and they are already influencing, they're already changing a system, they're creating a new and different educational paradigm. And as connections become stronger and stronger, their influence will be stronger and stronger. So they may connect with other schools having the same approach. And so the system of influence will become more and more powerful. About this topic of emergence, in my PowerPoint presentation, you're going to find also this TED Talk on YouTube, and you can find the link here. You can find it in English, but there are also Spanish subtitles and in Hungarian also. I think it's a very interesting reflection about emergence and how different systems work and where we can be found within those systems. So this was in order to deepen more the topic of emergence. And the second part is devoted to the weavers of communion. So we have to deepen the fact that leadership is a host. And this was a very inspiring sentence to many of us. So leadership is not a hero. So we can be found here within the quantum worldview. So we already seen the importance of relationship and processes. We've seen the importance of shared leadership, shared meaning and consensus, collaboration and community, and then collective mastery and leveraging diversity, systems thinking, the ability to be able to live with the paradox, holistic view. So this is the basis of a series of principles that we're going to list now, and I hope that you'll be reflecting upon them as soon as you have time. we said that leadership is convening.
Y que el liderazgo sea convocador tiene
What do
algunas
we mean?
características.
Well, it means that leadership has to have a series of characteristics and features.
Esta es la primera, ¿no?
That's the first one. Every community
Toda comunidad
is filled
está llena
with
de líderes.
leaders.
Un convencimiento
So
del líder anfitrión.
this is a trait of
Luca
the
hablaba
leader
de la autoridad
as a host.
de cada
Piluca
miembro,
was talking about the authority of each member.
a que cada miembro de la
So
comunidad
it's a matter of helping each member of the community, of the group, of the congregation, so that he or she can take on
su propia autoridad
his or her role of leader as a member of the congregation, of the community.
Entonces,
An authority that is granted upon them for being a member. So it's basically recognizing the fact that leaders are there and we just need to empower them,
estos son palabras
because every community is filled with leaders.
a la voz
And
del liderazgo.
we already mentioned these words when we were talking about leadership. So it's the power of
Segundo,
empowerment.
hemos dicho antes,
And then we already talked about this topic. Whatever the problem is, the community is or has the answer and the
es
solution.
decir, el líder no es aquel
That
que
is,
crea
the
dependencia,
leader is not a person
que
creating
necesitan,
dependence. So it's not like people need to say, oh, it's not like somebody who says, well, people need me. They wouldn't be able to do anything without me. No, it's a matter of a community. We have to work together. Sometimes I may need some external help, but
la riqueza del grupo emerja.
the main point is we need the richness of the group to emerge. So a facilitator, what does he do? He doesn't come up with solutions. No, he facilitates
Los recursos
the
y sus problemas.
finding of resources to come to a solution or to come to an answer.
Algo mágico ocurre
Magic happens when we encounter each other with respect, curiosity, and generosity.
Recuerden otra palabra que subrayaron antes del módulo 1.
In module 1, you highlighted a word, listening.
La gran mayoría de las personas
And
pusieron
most people
valoraban
focus on this word. Of course, they valued leadership because
hacía la
people listen to them. And that's what made the difference. So that's when we talk about listening. So we mean respect. So you have to respect other people, and then curiosity and generosity.
Volvemos al tema de la curiosidad.
And this brings us back to the topic of curiosity. Curiosity, which is the opposite of reaction.
Como ejemplo,
I gave you an example. Somebody is attacking me,
lo espontáneo,
and most spontaneous thing to do is I'm going to react. So if you attack me, I'm going to react in a way. So I would say, who do you think you are, for example? No, we should be curious. We should wonder, why is this happening? So out of curiosity, we should say, is there something that did I provoke this person, or so this is curiosity. Richard Rohr said that the opposite of contemplation is not action,
sino la reacción.
but reaction.
Esto es muy bueno.
And I think this is really good. So the opposite of contemplation is not action, but reaction.
Reacción
Because reaction
espontánea.
is something spontaneous,
La contemplación
whereas contemplation allows us to take a step back and to see, to look at things with curiosity, respect, and generosity.
no tenemos que esperar a
And we don't have to wait for external help. We have many resources with which we can make things better now.
algunas veces con algunos grupos
And I did this exercise with some groups. Well, I said just go and sit around the tables, and you have a large piece of paper and use pencils and colored pens and write first of all the gifts that each one of you has and they write them down. And then the second, gifts that other people recognize in you and that really surprised you. For example, you were talking to somebody and this person tells you, wow, you're really a good listener. And then you didn't realize, you thought that probably this skill was normal or standard, or somebody recognized a gift in you. And then the third point is gifts you have, but that you are not currently using. It's like you park them somewhere, you put them aside. And I remember that with a group, we covered the walls of a very large room. So, and we wrote on posters we put up on the walls the gifts of these groups. And is it possible that with so many gifts we cannot do anything? Do we need an external help? But we have so many gifts. So we have to be able to solve a problem with those. And then we must live the world we want today. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And then, yeah, important questions like, if it's not now, then when is it? And if it's not here, where? And if it's not us, who is it? And time goes by. We need to live it now, today. Some people have a dream and they say, no, I'm going to wait for time to go by as soon as I've got money or as soon as my children grow up. And then time goes by and 20 years go by. They're old, they don't have any money. And that children probably lived with unhappy parents. And then we find a clear sense of direction and we take an elegant minimum step forward. So we learn to live with uncertainty. The virus, COVID, taught us that we can make wonderful plans, but they're completely useless. We don't need calendars. We can have our plans about an excursion or a trip and so on, but they're useless. So the most important thing is we have a clear sense of direction. We know where we're heading, and that everything starts with first step. And we proceed one step at a time, making the path by walking it. So probably you know the story of Central America, of some European scientists who were investigating. They had to go to the forest, and a group of indigenous people went there, accompanied them, and took them there. And after walking and walking, the indigenous people sat down in silence. And European scientists didn't know what was going on, and they were just sitting there. This group of indigenous people was sitting there. And after a couple of days, after 4 days, the indigenous people just stood up, they took their things, and they started walking again. And, well, scientists were really amazed and flabbergasted. They were completely surprised. So they said, what's happening? And indigenous said, we've been walking too fast, acting in a very confused and accelerated way, and our souls just were left behind. So we needed to sit down to wait for our souls to come back to us. So we needed to wait for our souls to reach us. So step by step, we needed to revise things. We needed to keep on walking and revising things little by little so that we do not leave our souls behind. And then local work evolves to create a transformative change when connected to similar work around the world. So that's the importance to connect to other people. And now we're going to devote a couple of minutes to conversation with other people. We're going to invite Alice. Please join the conversation so that we can start a conversation with her. Can you please open your mic and speak? Alice, Welcome, Lizzie.
Hello.
Lizzie.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Good to see you. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Y Absalón, ¿puedes hablar, por favor? Ok.
Yeah.
I
Ok,
can't,
perfecto.
okay.
Ok, voy a hablar en
Can
español,
you
¿no?
speak? Well, I'm going to speak Spanish. And Lizzie, Absalón. I don't know if there's anything you would like to share your opinion with, or is anything you would like to comment on. I'm going to give you the floor.
Lizzie, si quieres comenzar.
Lizzie, maybe you want to start? I don't know. Would you like to start, Lizzie?
Well, I speak in English. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for this opportunity and thank you, Piluka, for both of your sessions these days. I also attended the SEDOS program where you were there, and I can see connections, first of all. What struck me today, particularly, is about weaving, the whole concept of weaving. I think moving from the whole idea of some individual having superpowers to solve the problems that we are faced with, whether in our congregations or whether in our society, in politics, even in the church, to the idea of making connections, making networking with whatever creativity that is available, and then seeking out companions to expand the weaving practices. I think that is very valuable for our times, because the world in which we live is far more complex than we really want to admit. Especially, Emily, when you gave us those paradigms, the two loops. I'm sure the loop that began with a pioneering spirit, or the work of the spirit, at some stage went into decay and composite, went to the stage of compost. So every idea that is born now will meet the same kind of destiny, if you like. So nothing is very permanent. Sometimes in religious life, it's so hard to see that. We like permanence. Permanence of ideas, permanence of values that are, or traditions, styles of leadership. So I think we are faced with an unprecedented kind of challenge COVID has created. We have done leadership in a particular way, like I am part of a general council, and last 6 years, we had a particular way of operating, traveling to places, meeting sisters on site, physically, discussing things, solving issues, all of that, animating. But now we can't do, we are stuck here. We can't do anything much in that sense. And yet, this very gathering we have, and I know that my board says there are 579 people attending this from all parts of the world. This is a new kind of weaving. We are experiencing that from that a forced reality of having to seek new ways and find the transition. We are somehow moving into, I don't want to say we are pioneering something, but this situation has forced us to find new ways. And as you said, we are the ones we are waiting for. And you also said the other day about collective intelligence. I think everybody has something to offer. And for us, leaders to really believe that. Any group that is brought together, that is to find solutions. It's easy to forget because there is an authority and the power that Piluka mentioned this, in the last session. The expectations placed on us and the expectations we have of ourselves as leaders, that we somehow have to solve everything. That's the paradigm I think we are struggling with still. To move to say the answer lies within the group, or there are similar groups out there who are asking the same questions and who also have something to offer and receive. So I hope this weaving can continue across congregations, across both men and women congregations, across other groups in the society, not just Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So these are my immediate thoughts.
Ok. Muchas gracias, Lizzie. Me olvidé de decir que Lizzie ya
And
dijo...
I forgot to say that Lizzie is a member of the General Council, and she's a member of the General Council of the Religious Women of Our Lady of the Missions. And Absalon is another missionary. It comes from Guatemala. So the image of weaving with colors is something very familiar to him because he knows it firsthand, and he's a missionary of the Communion of the Sacred Heart. So what can you tell us?
Por su gran aporte. Sí, español, perdón. Quisiera retomar un poco lo de el tejido.
I just wanted to say that weaving is an art where the weaver doesn't end up being the protagonist. So the woven fabric is the real protagonist. So the weaver is not the most important part, even though they're very skillful and they're very good at weaving, but the most important part is the woven product. So I think that weaving is an exercise of being humble, and that the figure of a woman who was weaving on her knees is very important. And then when you weave something, then the part, the top is really nice, but the bottom, the threads on the below the surface are not very nice, are ugly to see. And sometimes we are part of the fabric from the bottom, and we do not see how it looks on the top. And so sometimes we feel in a critical situation, and that's where we have to have that patience, that trust that we need. We need to have that harmony. We need to feel that the fabric is coming together. Sometimes we cannot see it from the bottom, from beneath the surface. So I really liked this image that, well, we also use it in our animation service. And we know that our creativity is in the community, not in the power of a single person. I think this is very enlightening. And we want to have a communion, not uniformity, which is a problem that we sometimes encounter with paradigms. In my own institute, I feel that sometimes people are afraid because they feel that the congregation is changing. But it's not the congregation that is changing, it's the paradigm by which we live that is changing. But sometimes this change of a mindset is not as obvious as it may seem. And that part really inspired me, and I think that it can really help us to make a difference. As Piluca said, and as Emily said too, the power originates from the role, not from the person. It doesn't stem from a person, but from a role. And we definitely have no other option. If a new paradigm comes up, then there's no other option than networking. And so we cannot live in separated worlds. We need to be, we have to avoid all the isms. So separatism or nationalism. So we need to be driven by the spirit of the weaving. I really like the example of the pizza you mentioned, because I think, yes, exactly, that's what you said. So something emerges, and that's the way it is. Sometimes we just spend too many energies wanting to change a system that is not going to change. So we just need to come up with alternatives to the system we are currently living in. I need a systemic change, but I need to stick to, I need to introduce a new system, not to stick to an old system. And I think that as animators, we have to we have to dare to jump into the void. Otherwise, we won't be able to change anything. We will just be sticking to the old paradigm. We'll just be stuck in the same paradigm. And these are the main points that struck me in what you said. And I think this is like a prophecy in a way. So we are walking a path of prophetic life. And I feel that today the prophecy is this one. So is this emergence and the loops and the creation of a bridge and daring. And sometimes we just need to work together. And not only based on power, but based on the authority. And we need to follow this path. And that's it, basically. I think we are called upon to follow this path. Thank you very much, Absalon.
A lo mejor también quiere decir algo, Piluca.
And Piluca maybe wanted to add something. I don't know. That's why I wanted her to join the conversation. Well, thank you very much, Emily, to give me once more the chance to talk. And listening to Lizzie and Absalon, I thought that, well, just as like before, talking with Liliana and Enrico, I thought that the vow of obedience needs to be reconsidered in a new context based on this approach, an approach of authority and power. And when we talk about community, then we have our own mental pattern of a community. That is my own community. It's like an individual kind of community. But I think that if we just talk about communities, that this will lead us to other horizons. Maybe it's not a wide horizon, but at least from a mental and practical point of view, in many cases, this is something that goes beyond the borders of our own congregations. Yes, I think this is important. I think that what Lisi said was really important, especially when she said that we need to go beyond our congregations and also beyond the Catholic Church. And I think that's exactly what the Pope is doing practically, with his own gestures, with these documents about human brotherhood, with his last encyclical, All Brothers, Fratelli Tutti. So he's opening up the doors to the whole of humankind. We need to reach an alliance with the whole of the world. We need to have this shift of a paradigm towards a different kind of humanity. So thank you very much, Lisi, for your inspirational words. Thank you, Absalon, to you too. I hope you're going to have a nice pizza tonight at home. Yes, I hope that something new emerges from there. Thanks. Thank you. And we're going to finalize this session. I just wanted to share with all of you
recordarles
and remind you what follows.
algunos asuntos para segundo. Eso es. Estoy compartiendo con ustedes
I'm sharing with you the website www.usgroma.org/leadership. From there, you'll be able to access the different documents here in this section. There are different fora, and there's a new forum now, forum number 4. You just have to click here on forum 4, and this time it will be different. So thank you once again for your contributions and for what you wrote in the forum. This time